There's been a massive push from the Liberal government to resettle thousands of Syrian refugees in Canada. But while the country opens its arms to some refugees, people from other countries say they're still facing massive obstacles in getting to Canada. Joining us from Montreal is Janet Dench, Executive Director of the Canadian Council for Refugees. Good morning.
Good morning.
Janet, tell me a little bit about this because, gosh, we've been talking about the Syrian refugees, obviously, for months now from what's going on. We know that they're coming in. We know the quotas this morning, as we've been reporting, is going up. What about refugees from other parts of the world? And I guess maybe to begin with, specifically Africa.
Well, yes, I'm glad that you've asked us to talk about this topic today because it is a concern for people from other parts of the world and wondering whether they have a little bit been forgotten in all of the rush to respond to Syrian refugees. So it is true that the processing times have been really very, very long, particularly in Africa. And also there have been a number of extra obstacles that have been put in the way of those who would want to sponsor refugees out of Africa. So it also applies to Afghan refugees, for example. So we're hoping that people who are now responding to Syrian refugees and understanding a bit what refugees go through might also take a moment to think about refugees from other regions of the world.
Let me ask you about those wait times because with regard to the Syrian refugees, and the government had to obviously raise different restrictions and expedite the process so that they could be here within a matter of months. What are we looking at in terms of wait times for other refugees?
Well, it is very routine for people to wait 5 years in processing before they come to Canada. So from the time that a sponsorship, a group in Canada files their application, it goes to an office in Winnipeg. That process can take quite a bit of time. Then it goes to a visa office overseas. And all of that process can easily take 5 years. And of course, during that time, people die, people get sick, children go without education, young girls get older and become subject to sexual abuse, sexual harassment. It's really unacceptable, obviously, to be taking 5 years to process an application.
And you know, one of the other differences is with regard to health care. Tell me about that for refugees not from Syria.
Yeah, so that's relating to some of the special measures that have been announced for the Syrian refugees, which are very welcome. The new government has agreed to restore a full interim federal health program for Syrian refugees that have arrived since the 4th of November. But we're hoping that that will just be the first step towards extending that for all other refugees. But at the moment, it means that 2 refugees who arrive on the same day, say today, if they arrive as a Congolese refugee, then they don't have the same health care coverage as if they're a Syrian refugee. And in fact, it applies also differentially for Syrian refugees. If one arrived in October, they don't have the same access to health care as one who arrived after November the 4th.
So tell me what the hope is in terms of this conversation, because Canada is talking about refugees now, more specifically at the moment Syrian, but about the cases for these other countries.
Well, we're already seeing it, I think, is that people who haven't really been thinking too much about refugees, but who have really responded to all of the coverage and the realities facing Syrian refugees. There have been groups that have got together, said we want to sponsor a Syrian refugee, and when they're trying to identify someone who in need of a sponsorship, they see the list of families, of individuals that are in need of sponsorship, and maybe they end up saying, well, let's go for the one that seems to be most in need. And they'll sometimes be taking Eritrean family, Congolese, Sudanese, Afghan, they'll be taking other families. And so we're hoping that more and more Canadians will look beyond the Syrian refugees. Obviously, that crisis is enormous, but look at also other situations and situations that have gone on for decades where people are refugees for more than one generation.
Janet Dench, thank you very much for coming on the show this morning.
Thanks for your interest.